My name is Leila. I am 30 years old and I live in Nashville, Tennessee. And I want to tell you about the night my mother-in-law told me to leave my own home and what my husband did when I started packing. Because what he did is the part of this story that changed everything. Not Patricia's ultimatum, not the dinner table, not the room going quiet around me while I stood there holding a glass of water trying to remember how to breathe. All of that was the test. What James did was the answer. And the answer, when it came, was not what I had spent 3 years quietly, privately, exhaustingly afraid it would be. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you to the dinner first. It was a Saturday in October, one of those Nashville evenings that arrives dressed as summer and reveals itself as autumn only after dark, when the temperature drops without warning and the air takes on that specific crispness that always makes me think of the beginning of things, rather than their ending, which is ironic given what the evening turned out to contain. James's family had come for the weekend. His parents, Patricia and Robert, had driven up from Chattanooga on Friday afternoon. His sister Dana and her husband Marcus had come from Knoxville. The gathering had the familiar character of the Whitfield family's weekend visits, warm enough on the surface, organized around meals and television, and the particular social choreography of people who know each other well enough to have stopped pretending that everything is effortless. I had cooked. This matters, not as a detail of domestic performance, but as a fact relevant to what followed. I had spent 4 hours on Saturday preparing a meal for 7 people in the kitchen of the house that James and I had owned together for 2 years, a house whose mortgage was paid jointly, whose decor reflected both of our tastes, whose backyard I had spent 3 weekends in September landscaping because I had wanted it to look beautiful when the family came. I had made roasted lamb with herbed potatoes, a salad, fresh bread from a bakery I had driven specifically to that morning, and a chocolate cake for dessert because Robert had mentioned in passing at an earlier visit that chocolate cake was his favorite. I tell you this because I want you to understand the specific, layered irony of what Patricia said in the dining room of the home I had prepared for her arrival. Dinner had been going for about 40 minutes. The conversation had the particular texture of Whitfield family dinners, which I had attended for 3 years and had learned to navigate with the careful attention of someone who understands that the surface of a conversation is not always its full content. Robert talked about a project at work. Dana and Marcus discussed a vacation they were planning. James talked about the renovation project he and his colleague were bidding on, with the animated energy he always brought to work he was genuinely excited about. Patricia put down her fork. Not loudly. Patricia never did anything loudly when she could do it quietly and have it carry more weight. She set her fork on her plate with this specific, precise placement of someone making a gesture rather than simply ending a bite. And she looked at me with the expression I had seen before, the expression that existed at the exact boundary of pleasantness and something that was not pleasantness. She said, "Leila, can I say something?" The table did not immediately go quiet. People were still in mid-conversation, mid-chew, mid-pour. But something in Patricia's tone, the specific register of it, the quality of preparation it carried, pulled the room's attention the way a dropped spoon pulls a room's attention. Briefly, and then completely.
"Of course," I said. I should have said nothing. But you say, of course, because that is what you say, and because some part of you still believes, even after 3 years of evidence, that the thing coming is going to be manageable. "I've been thinking," Patricia said, "about this house, about you and James and the arrangement here." James was at the head of the table to my left. I did not look at him. "I think," Patricia continued, in the warm, careful tone of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say and is delivering it with practiced naturalness, that things would be better for James, for the family, for everyone, if you found your own place, Leila, if you stepped back from this particular situation. The room was completely quiet. Robert had set down his glass. Dana was looking at the tablecloth. Marcus was looking at Patricia with an expression I did not have the bandwidth to decode. I was looking at Patricia. If you found your own place, if you stepped back from this particular situation, 3 years of marriage, 2 years of this house, 4 hours of cooking this morning for her arrival, and she was sitting at my dining room table using the fork I had set for her, eating the food I had made, and telling me to leave. The silence lasted long enough that it became its own kind of statement. Then I set down my own fork, I picked up my water glass, I took a sip, not for the water, but because the act of doing something ordinary in the middle of something extraordinary is the only way to keep yourself from disappearing entirely into the moment. I looked at Patricia. I looked at Robert. I looked at Dana, who met my eyes briefly and looked away with the expression of someone who is ashamed and does not yet know what to do with it. I looked at James. James was looking at the table. I stood up. I said very quietly to no one in particular, "Excuse me," and I went upstairs. I want to tell you what the staircase felt like because I think it matters. 14 steps from the dining room to the landing. I had walked those steps hundreds of times in 2 years. In the morning with coffee, at night coming to bed, carrying laundry, running back up for a forgotten phone. They were ordinary stairs in an ordinary house that I had chosen with my husband and moved into with the specific, hopeful intention of building a life there. Those 14 steps had never felt the way they felt that night. Each one felt like a decision. Not the decision of whether to leave the table. I had already made that, and making it required everything available to me in that moment. But the larger decision waiting at the top of the stairs, in the bedroom where my suitcase was stored in the closet, where my clothes hung in the wardrobe James and I had bought together at an estate sale the first spring in the house. The decision about what to do next. I reached the landing. I went into our bedroom. I opened the closet. I pulled out the suitcase, and I set it on the bed. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because I think the honest version of this story is more useful than the version where I was simply strong and clear and dignified throughout. I was devastated. Not by Patricia. She had been building towards something like this for 3 years, and some part of me had always known it was coming, even when I refused to believe it would arrive in quite this form. I was devastated by the 14 steps between the dining room and the bedroom, by the suitcase on the bed, by the silence from the dining room below where I could hear, muffled and indistinct, the sound of a family resuming its dinner, by the fact that when I looked at James, he had been looking at the table. I sat on the edge of the bed with the suitcase open in front of me, and I began, slowly, to think about what I was going to do. Not because Patricia's ultimatum deserved to be obeyed. It did not. It had no legal standing, no moral authority, no basis in any reality except Patricia's conviction that her son's home was an extension of her domain. But because the question in front of me was really not about Patricia, it was about James. It was about the man sitting at the foot of the dining room table who looked at the tablecloth while his mother told his wife to leave. And what he did next in the next few minutes would tell me everything I needed to know about whether the life I had been building in this house was real. I reached into the closet for the first stack of folded sweaters, and then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Before I tell you what happened when that bedroom door opened, I need to take you back. Not far, not to childhood or to the deep archaeology of family origins, though both of those things are relevant in ways I will explain. I need to take you back 4 years, to a Thursday evening in June in a bar in East Nashville, where a mutual friend had organized one of those gatherings that is nominally a birthday party and is actually just the social circumstance that produces whatever happens next.
I was 26. I was working at the marketing firm where I would eventually be promoted in a junior role that was demanding and occasionally frustrating and genuinely interesting. I had an apartment on Woodland Street with 2 plants I was competently maintaining and a reading chair by the window that I considered the best thing I owned. My life was, in the honest assessment of someone who has the retrospective view, good, complete in its own way, not waiting for anything, simply being itself. James Whitfield walked into that bar with our mutual friend Derek and introduced himself with the specific, slightly awkward sincerity of a man who finds small talk genuinely difficult and has decided that honesty is a more sustainable strategy than charm. He said, "I'm terrible at these things. You look like you might also be terrible at these things. Do you want to find somewhere quieter to stand?" I laughed. We found a quieter corner. We talked for 2 hours while Derek circulated around the room doing the social work neither of us was contributing to. And we covered in those 2 hours more real ground than I had covered in many longer relationships. James was an architect. Not in the romantic, artistic sense, in the practical, problem-solving sense of someone who loved the engineering of space, who thought about how buildings serve the people inside them, who could talk about load-bearing walls and sight lines, and the specific challenge of making a small room feel large, with a combination of technical knowledge and genuine enthusiasm that I found immediately and completely compelling. He was kind. I noticed this early in the small ways that kindness reveals itself before you have a language for what you are observing, the way he made space in a conversation, the way he listened without assembling his response while you were still speaking, the way he treated the bar staff with the same attention he brought to talking to Derek or to me. We dated for a year. We moved in together. We married in a small ceremony at Percy Warner Park on a May afternoon with our families and closest friends present, and the specific, uncomplicated joy of 2 people who have decided on each other and are making it official. The marriage was good. I want to say this clearly because the story I am in the process of telling you contains difficulties that might obscure the fundamental truth of what James and I were to each other before Patricia's Saturday ultimatum made impossible to minimize. The problem that I minimized for longer than I should have, and that Patricia's Saturday ultimatum made impossible to minimize, was not the marriage itself. The problem was what sat outside the marriage and exerted consistent, escalating pressure against its walls. I had received warnings early about Patricia, not from James. He was constitutionally unable to see his mother clearly in the way that certain kinds of devoted children cannot fully perceive the people their parents actually are because the love is too close and too old to allow the necessary distance for accurate observation. The warnings came from elsewhere, from Dana, who said on one occasion before the wedding, with the specific, careful phrasing of someone choosing their words because they know they are on difficult terrain, she loves James very much. Just know that going in. She loves him in a way that takes up a lot of space. From Derek, who had known the Whitfield family longer than I had, and who said when I announced the engagement, with a mixture of genuine happiness and something more cautious, "James is wonderful. His mother is a piece of work. Keep your eyes open." From my own instincts, on my first extended family visit, when I observed Patricia in her natural habitat and felt beneath the graciousness of her welcome a quality I could not name precisely, but which registered as assessment, the specific, sustained attention of someone deciding what you are and what you represent, not because they are curious about you, but because they are calculating your impact on something they consider theirs. I minimized all of it because I loved James, because the warnings were vague enough to be deniable, because Patricia was warm to me in the early months with a warmth that felt real, even if it was also, I would come to understand, conditional on certain things that I did not yet know were being evaluated. The house purchase, 2 years into our marriage, was the first significant moment of Patricia friction. James and I found the house in Germantown, a neighborhood we both loved, walkable, with the specific character of a place that has been carefully preserved while also genuinely evolving. 3 bedrooms, a backyard that needed work, a kitchen that needed updating. We loved it immediately and completely, the way you sometimes love a house before you have fully articulated why. We made an offer. The offer was accepted. Patricia came to see it the weekend after the purchase was complete. She walked through each room with the specific, thorough attention of someone conducting an inspection rather than a celebration. And in the kitchen I was already planning to update, the project I was excited about, she said, "It's smaller than I expected for what you paid. James, you probably should have had someone else look at the numbers before you committed." James said, "We both loved it, Mom. The numbers work." She moved on to the next room. I noted the you in her sentence. Not you two, not you both, you, James, as though the purchase had been a decision made by one person about whom she had concerns, rather than a decision made by 2 people who had been entirely aligned. I noted it. I did not say anything about it. This was the beginning of a pattern that would define the next 2 years. Patricia's encroachment was not dramatic. This is the thing about the Patricias of the world that makes them simultaneously so exhausting and so difficult to confront directly. They operate in a register that is always just below the threshold of the undeniably objectionable. A comment that could be concern, an opinion that could be helpfulness, an exclusion that could be an oversight. She called James daily, not once a week, not several times a week, daily, with the consistency of someone maintaining a connection they consider non-negotiable. Most of the calls were brief, and from what I could hear of James's side, fairly ordinary. But their dailiness was itself a structure, a thread running through our marriage that I had not consented to, but that existed regardless of my consent. She referred to the house as James's house, never our house, never Leila's house, never the house you two bought, James's house, consistently across multiple visits and conversations in a way that was too sustained to be careless. She made decisions, or expressed strong opinions that functioned as decisions, about things that were our decisions to make. The color we should paint the living room, the neighborhood association James should join, the holidays that needed to be spent in Chattanooga, and the ones where Nashville was acceptable. These were delivered with the specific, firm warmth of someone who genuinely believed their involvement was welcome and did not recognize the difference between interest and interference. And James, kind, loving, constitutionally unable to see his mother clearly, received each of these things with the specific tolerance of a man who had grown up inside them and had long since stopped perceiving them as unusual. I absorbed them and told myself it was manageable. I told myself this for 3 years, until a Saturday in October when Patricia sat at my dining room table and told me to leave, and the management budget I had been drawing on for 3 years finally ran out. 3 years is a long time to carry something. I want to take you through what those 3 years actually contained, not a comprehensive catalog because the complete accounting would be its own very long story, but the specific incidents that built the architecture of the situation I was living inside by the time that October dinner arrived. The incidents that I had absorbed, forgiven, minimized, explained away, and filed under the general heading of "This is just how she is" in a mental folder that had become, by October, too full to close. The first significant incident happened 8 months into our marriage, at Christmas. We had planned to spend Christmas Eve with my family in Memphis, my parents, my brother, a tradition I had maintained my entire adult life, and which James had been welcomed into warmly and reciprocally for 2 years. We had planned to drive to Chattanooga on Christmas Day for the Whitfield celebration, which James' family observed on the day itself. Patricia called in November to tell James that the family Christmas would be on Christmas Eve this year, not asked, told. A date change delivered as a logistics update rather than a request for our agreement, because our agreement had not occurred to her as a relevant variable. James came to me with this information in the careful tone of a man delivering news he knows is going to require a conversation. "She just changed the date without asking us?" I said. "She didn't really think of it that way," James said. "She had a reason. Dana and Marcus have a conflict on the 25th. "Dana and Marcus have a conflict," I said. "So the entire family's plans change, including ours." "I know," he said. "I know it's not ideal. We negotiated. We rearranged. We shortened my family's Christmas Eve to accommodate a drive to Chattanooga, arriving at the Whitfield house at 10 p.m. after a 5-hour drive, exhausted and slightly resentful, and performing the warmth of people who were glad to be there. My mother asked afterward why we had left early. I said there had been a scheduling conflict. I did not say my mother-in-law changed the date without asking us, and my husband said yes. I filed it. I moved on. The second incident that mattered happened in our first year in the Germantown house. Patricia came to visit for a long weekend, and on the Sunday of her visit, rearranged the kitchen. Not dramatically. She did not empty the cabinets and start over. She moved specific items. The glasses from one cabinet to another. The spices reorganized by category rather than by frequency of use. The pot lids moved to a different drawer than the one they had lived in since we moved in. When I came downstairs Sunday morning and opened the cabinet for a glass, I found a different cabinet. I stood in my kitchen for a moment with my hand on the open cabinet door. "I hope you don't mind," Patricia said from the kitchen table, with the warm, pleased expression of someone who has done something thoughtful. "I'll find them," I said. My voice was level. "It's just more efficient. You'll thank me once you're used to it." James came downstairs 20 minutes later and found me in the kitchen reorganizing the cabinets back to where they had been. He looked at the cabinets, at me, at his mother. "She's putting them back," Patricia said, with the specific wounded tone of someone whose helpfulness has been rejected. "Leila," James started. "These are my cabinets," I said, quietly, completely. "In my house. I would like them where I put them." James looked between us. "Mom, maybe let Leila organize things the way she wants."
He said. Patricia said, of course, naturally, she had only meant to help. She was gracious about it. She was always gracious about these things, which was the most maddening part. The wrongness was always wrapped in such consistent graciousness that objecting to it made you feel like the unreasonable one. I put the cabinets back. I said nothing else about it. James did not follow up with me privately, did not acknowledge that what had happened had been more than an organizational disagreement. He moved on with the Sunday. I noted this. I filed it. I told myself it was manageable. The third category of incident was the one that hurt most directly. Patricia had a way of talking about the future, James's future, the family's future, the plans and possibilities that lay ahead that did not include me. Not explicitly. She never said, "when James finds someone better suited," or anything so direct, but the language was consistently James-centric in a way that, accumulated over 3 years, produced a clear picture. When James builds his own firm, he'll need to be close to good contractors. Not, when you too build toward that, or when James and Leila think about relocation. James. James has always wanted a particular kind of family life. Not, James and Leila, or what you two envision. James. I just want what's best for my son. A statement that seemed to conclude discussions rather than open them, and which always left me in the specific, uncomfortable position of someone who has just been reminded, graciously and with warm intent, that they are not the person at the center of the concern. Dana noticed this. She said so to me once, carefully, during a visit when the two Les had a few minutes alone in the kitchen. "She does that thing," Dana said, "where it's always just about James. I've noticed it with you. It's not, she doesn't mean it the way it sounds." "How does she mean it?" I asked. Dana was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said slowly,
She means it exactly the way it sounds. She just doesn't know she's doing it. By the third year, I had developed a specific practiced composure for Patricia interactions. Not coldness. I was not cold to her, and I want to be clear about this because it is relevant to the October dinner. I was consistently warm, consistently present, consistently the person who prepared the food and organized the visits, and sent birthday cards on time and remembered that Robert's favorite dessert was chocolate cake. I did this not because I was performing. I did it because I genuinely believed, for a long time, that if I was good enough to be a daughter-in-law, the relationship would eventually find solid ground, that Patricia's assessment of me would shift, that the daily calls and the cabinet reorganizations and the James-centric future talk would eventually give way to something more genuinely mutual. I was wrong about this. I understand now that no amount of effort on my part was going to change the fundamental reality, which was that Patricia had decided before I arrived what the shape of her son's life should look like, and I did not fit the shape she had in mind, and no quantity of chocolate cakes was going to resolve that. What I was right about was James. I was right that James was the person I believed him to be, that the kindness I had identified in a bar in East Nashville on a Thursday evening in June was real and structural rather than performed, that he was capable of seeing clearly and of acting on what he saw, even when what he saw was difficult. I was right about this, but I had not yet had the proof. I was upstairs with a suitcase on the bed when the proof arrived. The suitcase was a dark gray rolling bag that James and I had bought together 2 years earlier for a trip to Portugal that had been, at the time, the best vacation of my life. We had spent 10 days in Lisbon and the Alentejo region, eating extraordinarily well and walking more than we had planned, and talking with the specific, unhurried depth that travel produces in people who are genuinely good at being together. I thought about Portugal while I opened the suitcase on the bed. I thought about a particular afternoon in Évora, sitting at a small table outside a restaurant, drinking wine we had chosen by pointing at the menu because neither of us spoke Portuguese, laughing about something I no longer remember, the late afternoon light on the white buildings making everything look like it had been arranged specifically for the purpose of being beautiful. I thought about this because the mind, when it is trying to absorb something too large, finds the smaller, better things and holds them up as evidence. Evidence that the thing you are losing is real, that it contained real moments, that the loss is not nothing. I began folding sweaters. There is a specific quality to packing a suitcase when you are leaving a place you did not intend to leave. It is different from packing for a trip. When you pack for a trip, the motion is forward-facing. You are selecting what you need for where you are going. When you are packing to leave something, the motion is retrospective. Every item you place in the suitcase is a decision about what belongs to you alone versus what belongs to the life you are in the process of leaving. The green sweater, mine, purchased before the marriage, easy. The blue cashmere James had given me for my birthday 2 years ago, mine, a gift but charged with everything that gift had meant at the time it was given. The cream knit I wore on Sunday mornings in the reading chair, mine. The photograph on the nightstand from our wedding, not portabled in a suitcase, I thought, and then realized I was thinking about this wrong, that I was not definitively leaving, that I had not made the final decision, that the suitcase was an expression of motion rather than a committed destination. I sat on the edge of the bed. The sounds from downstairs were muffled but present. I could hear voices, not the words, just the texture of a conversation resuming after something has happened, the specific social sound of people filling a silence that has been left by someone who is no longer in the room. I thought about what I knew. I knew that I had not done anything wrong. This was the clearest thing I knew, and it mattered to hold it clearly.
I had been a good wife, a good daughter-in-law in every way available to me given the circumstances, a genuine and consistent contributor to the marriage and the home and the family gatherings that Patricia organized around herself. The ultimatum was not a response to something I had done. It was the expression of something Patricia had decided before I arrived and had been building toward for 3 years. I knew that the question in front of me was not whether Patricia's ultimatum had authority. It did not. It had no legal standing, no moral weight, no practical power. I did not have to leave because Patricia Whitfield told me to leave from across my own dining room table. I knew that the question was James, had always been James. Everything in the 3 years of Patricia had ultimately been a question about James, about whether he saw what was happening, about whether he was capable of the clarity and the courage that the situation required, about whether the man I married was the man I believed him to be. I had been waiting for this question to be answered in a form I could not explain away. It was being answered right now in real time, downstairs, by his silence, by the sound of a family resuming dinner while his wife sat on the edge of the bed with a half-packed suitcase and waited. I reached for the next stack of clothes, and then I stopped, because I understood, sitting there with folded shirts in my hands, that what I was doing mattered regardless of what James did or did not do downstairs. I was packing not as a tactic, not packing to make a point or produce a reaction. I was packing because Patricia had told me to leave, and I had decided in the dining room that I was not going to sit back down at that table and eat my food and pretend nothing had happened. That was not about James. That was about me. I was not going to perform comfort where there was none. I was not going to return to that table and make the remainder of the evening easier for the people who sat there without objecting. I was going to be somewhere that reflected the reality of the situation, which was a bedroom with a suitcase, because the reality was that something had been said in that dining room that could not be unsaid, and that required a response proportional to its weight. But I had not decided to leave permanently, not yet, not until I knew what James was going to do. I placed the shirts in the suitcase. I reached for the next stack, and then the bedroom door opened.
I did not turn around immediately. I heard the door, heard it close quietly behind whoever had come through it, and I stayed where I was, facing the open suitcase, a folded shirt in my hands, because I needed the 1 or 2 seconds between the door opening and whatever came next. I needed to know, before I saw his face, that I was calm, that whatever he said, I would be able to hear it clearly rather than through the filter of my own hope or dread. I put the shirt in the suitcase. I turned around. James was standing just inside the doorway. He was not carrying anything, not an offering, not the performative gesture of someone arriving with wine or a tissue. He was just standing there, in his clothes from dinner, looking at me and the suitcase and the half-sorted clothes on the bed with an expression I had not seen on his face before. Something between grief and clarity. The expression of a man who has just, in the past 5 minutes, understood something he should have understood earlier and is carrying the weight of that understanding. He did not speak for a moment. Neither did I. We looked at each other across the bedroom we had shared for 2 years, over the suitcase that had carried us to Portugal and back, in the house we had bought together, and that his mother had just told me to leave. "Don't pack," he said. 2 words, the most important 2 words he had ever said to me. Not because they resolved everything. They did not, and I knew they could not, and I was not going to let them function as a resolution without the conversation that needed to follow. But because they told me, before anything else was said, that he had come upstairs with a position rather than with management, that he had not come to explain his mother, or soften the evening, or ask me to be patient. He had come to choose. "James," I said, "Don't pack," he said again. "Please, give me 20 minutes." I looked at him. "What are you going to do with 20 minutes?" I said. He looked at the door, at me, at the suitcase. "I'm going to go back downstairs, and I'm going to say what I should have said at the table." I held his gaze for one more moment. "James," I said, "if you go back down there and manage the situation, if you smooth it over and apologize to everyone and make it comfortable for the table, I am going to finish packing this suitcase and I'm going to leave tonight. Not because your mother asked me to, because I cannot live in a marriage where that is what you do when something like this happens." He nodded. He understood. I could see that he understood. "That's not what I'm going to do," he said. He held my gaze for one more moment. Then he turned, opened the bedroom door, and went back downstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed. The suitcase was still open in front of me. The half-sorted clothes were still on the bed, the shirts in the suitcase, the sweaters folded beside it, the cream knit I wore on Sunday mornings placed to the side in the specific, undecided position of something that had not yet been assigned to either category. I sat very still and I listened. The stairs, 14 of them, I had counted them many times in 2 years without meaning to, made a specific sound under James's footsteps that I knew as well as I knew the sound of his voice. I heard him descend them. I heard the faint sound of the dining room door, which we had left ajar on the bottom hinge because it swung closed on its own otherwise, and we had never gotten around to fixing it. And then I heard James's voice from downstairs. Not the words. The bedroom floor and the dining room ceiling between us muffled the specific content of what he was saying into a general register of tone and rhythm rather than comprehensible language. But tone and rhythm were enough, in the first 30 seconds, to tell me something essential. He was not apologizing. I recognized an apologetic voice. I had heard it from James in the past, the specific combination of softening and explanation that people use when they are trying to reduce a situation. That was not what I was hearing. What I was hearing was level, calm, the sustained, uninterrupted tone of a man making a statement rather than opening a negotiation. Not loud, not heated, but continuous in a way that apologies are not continuous, that management is not continuous. The tone of someone who has decided what he's going to say and is saying it. I put my hands in my lap. I waited. The conversation lasted, I think, about 12 minutes. I know this because I was aware of time in the way you are aware of time when you are waiting for something important, and I tracked it in the specific, involuntary way the mind tracks things that matter without being asked. 12 minutes. Long enough for something real to have been said, long enough for the family to have heard it. At one point, Patricia's voice, higher in register than James's, carrying more urgency than the controlled volume of the house would normally have produced, cut through the floor in a way that was distinct from the general murmur of the conversation. Not words still, but a quality that I recognized as objection, the sound of someone's position being challenged and responding to the challenge. James's voice continued, level, consistent, uninterrupted by the objection in any way I could detect. Then relative quiet. Then, faintly, Robert's voice, and Robert's voice, in my experience of family dinners, was rare in moments of tension. He was a man who let Patricia conduct the family's emotional business, while he occupied the background, and his speaking suggested that whatever James had said had reorganized the room into a configuration that had not previously existed. Then quiet again. Then footsteps. James's footsteps on the stairs. He came back into the bedroom and he closed the door behind him, and I saw it on his face before he said anything, the specific, spent quality of a person who has done something that cost them something real, who has entered a room carrying a decision and has left the room lighter in one sense and heavier in another. He sat on the bed beside me. He did not immediately speak. I did not ask him to.
We sat side by side on the edge of the bed with the open suitcase in front of us and the October night outside the window and the muffled sound of something happening downstairs, chairs moving, a door, low voices, and I let the silence be what it needed to be for a few minutes. "What did you say?" I said, finally. He was quiet for a moment. "I told her she had no right to say what she said to you, in our home at our table." He paused. "I told her that you are my wife and that this is your home as much as it is mine, and that no one, including her, gets to tell you to leave it." I said nothing. "I told her," he continued, and his voice had the careful, deliberate quality of someone reporting accurately rather than presenting themselves favorably, that she wanted a relationship with us, with me. It was going to require her to understand that, really understand it, not apologize and come back next month and do the same thing in a different form. "What did she say?" I said. "She said she was being disrespectful." A pause. "She said she was trying to help. She said I didn't understand."
And? I told her that I understood completely, that I had been watching her treat you as though you were secondary in this marriage for 3 years, and that I had not done enough about it, and that tonight was the end of that. I looked at him. "You told her you hadn't done enough?" I said. "Because I hadn't," he said. Simply, without self-flagellation, but also without excuse. The specific honesty of a man who has looked at something clearly and is reporting what he saw. I knew what she was doing. Not all of it, not the full picture, maybe, but enough. And I told myself it was manageable, that you were handling it, that it would settle over time. "It was not manageable," I said. "No," he said, "it wasn't." We were quiet. "James," I said, "why tonight? What was different about tonight?" He thought about this for a moment. "Because tonight she said it in front of everyone," he said, "and I watched you walk upstairs with the specific dignity of a person who was not going to make a scene that nobody deserves. And I sat at that table for about 4 minutes after you left, and I thought about what I was going to do. And I realized..." He paused. "I realized that there was nothing to think about. There was only one thing I could do that was right, and I should have been doing it for 3 years." I held this. "I'm not finished being angry," I said. "I know," he said. "Not at your mother, at you, for the 3 years of not doing enough." "I know," he said again, without defense, without the impulse to explain it away, just, "I know." We sat with that for a moment. Then I reached forward and zipped the suitcase closed. Not to pack it, to close it. I put it on the floor beside the bed. "We have a lot to talk about," I said. "Yes," he said. "But not tonight. Tonight, I need to know that your family is downstairs understanding what just happened." He nodded. "I think they understand," he said. I want to tell you what happened downstairs, because it did not end with James's return to the bedroom. James had made his statement, but statements in a room full of people do not land and settle cleanly. They produce responses, and those responses produce their own responses, and the full shape of what a statement means is often only visible in the hour after it is made, rather than in the moment of its delivery. I know this because I went to the top of the stairs, not down. I did not go downstairs that evening, and I was not going to, but I sat at the top of the staircase, on the landing, with my back against the wall and my knees drawn up, and I listened to what happened in the dining room after James came back down. I am not going to pretend this was a noble or composed thing to do. It was not. It was the entirely human act of a person who needed to know what was happening in the room below and did not have a more dignified way of finding out. James's voice from downstairs carried more clearly from the landing than it had from the bedroom. The angles were different, the distance shorter, and the dining room had gone quiet in a way that made voices travel. He was saying, when I settled onto the landing, "I'm not looking for a discussion about this. I want to be clear about that." Patricia's voice,
I could hear her more clearly now, and the quality of it was different from what I knew, tighter, higher, with the specific quality of a woman who was genuinely upset rather than performing upset. "James, I was trying to help. I have always only tried to—" "Mom?" His voice was not raised. It had a quality I can only describe as a wall. Not cold, but completely unyielding. "Mom, I know you believe that, but what you said tonight was not help. It was not your place. This is Leila's home. It has been her home since the day we bought it, and it will be her home after tonight. And anyone who wants to be in this house and in this family is going to reckon with that." Silence. Robert's voice, low and brief. I could not hear what he said, but the tone was placating, not toward me, not taking a side, but the specific pacifying tone of a man who does not want a confrontation to continue, regardless of its merits. James responded to whatever Robert had said. I caught fragments. "Not about sides, Dad. It's about basic respect, and 3 years, and I should have, and most clearly, the sentence that landed even through a floor and a wall and the specific acoustic properties of a Nashville Germantown row house. She is my wife. She comes first." Then a longer silence. Dana's voice. I had not expected Dana, who tended toward quiet in family conflicts, but Dana said something that Dana herself described to me the following morning as 7 years of watching her do this to other people finally finding a voice. I do not know exactly what Dana said either, but whatever it was, it had come from a place of long accumulated honesty, and it had been received by the table with the specific settled silence that honest things arrive after a long delay. Patricia had not slept in the guest room. She and Robert had left at 9 o'clock. I had heard from the landing the sounds of departure, without managing to decipher their exact character, until I came downstairs 40 minutes later and found the dining room cleared, and James at the kitchen sink, and the house quiet in the way of a house where something significant has just concluded. "They left?" I said. "Yes," he said. "How did it end?" He dried his hands. He turned around. He said, "My dad said something I didn't know he had in him, and Dana said some things." He paused. "And my mother left without saying anything to me, which means she is hurt and needs time to decide what she thinks about all of this." "Do you think she'll understand?" I said. He considered this honestly. "I think," he said, "that she has spent 60 years being the central figure in her family's story, and tonight she encountered a version of that story where she is not the protagonist. That's going to take time." He paused. "But I think she will come to understand it, because the alternative is not having us in her life, and I don't think she wants that." "And if she doesn't?" I said. He looked at me steadily. "Then she doesn't," he said, "but that's her choice to make. Not ours." I looked at my husband in the kitchen of our house, the kitchen whose cabinet organization I had restored from Patricia's reorganization 2 years ago, the kitchen I cooked in for 4 hours this morning for a family gathering that had ended with Patricia leaving at 9 p.m. and the dishes done and the house quiet. And I felt for the first time since I had walked up those 14 stairs carrying the weight of the dining room's silence, something that might have been the beginning of relief. Not resolution, not yet. There was a conversation still to be had, the real one, the conversation about the 3 years and what they meant and what needed to change. But something, the beginning of something.
I slept in our bed that night. I want to tell you this simply, without the weight of significance, because it was a simple act. I chose to sleep in my own bed, in my own house, which was exactly as much of a statement as it needed to be, and no more. The suitcase was on the floor beside the nightstand. I did not unpack it that night. I left it there, closed, as a fact rather than a threat, a reminder to both of us of what the evening had contained and what still needed to be addressed. James and I did not talk at length that night. We had established the essential thing, his position, my understanding of it, the preliminary shape of what came next, and we were both too exhausted for the full conversation that was needed. exhausted in the specific, substantive way of people who have been through something real, rather than the surface exhaustion of a busy day. We lay in the dark, and he said, "Are we okay?" And I said, "We are not finished, but we are not done." He understood the distinction. James, whatever his failures in the years leading to this evening, was a person who understood distinctions when they mattered. We slept. The morning was Sunday, and Sunday mornings in our house had a specific character that I had come to love over 2 years. The light coming in through the east window at a particular angle, the sound of the neighborhood waking slowly, the ritual of coffee made without urgency in a kitchen that felt most like itself in the quiet hours before the day fully committed to being the day. James made coffee. I came downstairs at 8:30 to find it ready and him at the kitchen table with his own cup, looking out the window at the backyard where my October landscaping had, despite everything, produced something genuinely beautiful. I poured my coffee. I sat across from him. "I want to have the real conversation," I said. "Not last night's version, the full one." "Yes," he said. We talked for 2.5 hours. I want to tell you the shape of that conversation rather than the entirety of it, because some of what was said belongs to us and not to this story, but the shape matters. I told him first what 3 years of Patricia had actually cost me, not in the summary form I had used in our occasional previous discussions of his mother, the compressed, managed version that I had always softened at the edges to avoid making him choose. The full version, the Christmas Eve, the cabinet reorganization, the James-centric future talk, the specific cumulative weight of being the person who absorbed all of it without sufficient support from my partner. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he did not defend his mother, and he did not defend himself. He said, "I knew more of this than I acknowledged. Not all of it, some of the specifics I genuinely didn't know, but the pattern, the overall shape of what she was doing, I knew enough." "Why didn't you act on it?" I said. He took a long time with this question, which I respected. "Because acting on it meant a confrontation with her that I had been avoiding my entire life," he said. "Because I had never had to draw a line with my mother before, and I didn't know how, and so I told myself the situation was manageable and let you carry what I should have been carrying with you." I held this. "James, I need specific things to change, not vague commitments, specific things." He said, "Tell me." The terms I set were not complicated. They were, I thought, the minimum requirements for a marriage that functioned as a partnership rather than a performance. First, the daily calls with Patricia needed to change, not end. I was not asking him to sever the relationship with his mother, and I want to be clear about that, because I think it is an important distinction. I was not asking him to choose me over her. I was asking him to have appropriate boundaries with her, the kind that reflect the reality that he was a grown man with a wife and a home of his own. I am telling you this story from the kitchen of our house in Germantown on a Sunday morning in March. 5 months since that October dinner. 5 months since I sat on the edge of the bed with a suitcase open in front of me and heard James's footsteps on the stairs. 5 months since I sat at the top of those 14 steps with my back against the wall and listened to my husband say in the dining room below, "She is my wife. She comes first." The backyard through the kitchen window is different now than it was in October. The vivid, brief colors have long since fallen, and March in Nashville is the specific, provisional green of a season that has not yet committed to being fully itself, testing the temperature before flowering completely. I find I like March in Nashville more than I used to. I want to tell you what the 5 months have actually looked like, because I think the honest version matters more than the resolved one. Patricia came to Nashville in January.
James and I had discussed this visit in advance, with the specificity we had never brought to previous visits. The length of it, the sleeping arrangements, the specific expectation that she would not reorganize anything in our house, the understanding that any conversation about our future, our decisions, our plans, would be received as input rather than direction. She arrived on a Friday afternoon. She was, I will say honestly, different in a way I had not entirely expected. Not transformed. People do not transform in 3 months, and I was not expecting transformation, but genuinely quieter in the specific spaces where she had previously been loudest. She did not comment on the kitchen. She did not refer to the house as James's. She asked me at dinner on Friday night about my work, specifically with the genuine attention of someone who had decided to try something new and was discovering that genuine curiosity produced genuine conversation. It was not comfortable exactly. There was an awareness in the room of everything that had happened and everything that still needed to settle. But it was real. It had a quality of actual effort that I received with appropriate caution and appropriate credit. At one point on Saturday afternoon, Patricia and I were alone in the kitchen while James took Robert to see a building he was working on nearby. She stood at the counter with a cup of tea, and she looked at me with the specific, direct expression of a woman who has been working up to something. "I owe you more than a phone call apology," she said. I waited. She stopped, started again. "I have not been fair to you over the years. I didn't see it that way at the time, but I understand now that I made you feel unwelcome in your own home, in your own marriage, and that was wrong." I looked at her. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "It means something." "I want things to be different," she said. "I don't know entirely how to do that yet, but I want to." I thought about this, about whether it was enough, whether it was the beginning of something or the performance of one, whether the woman standing in my kitchen with her tea was genuinely seeing something new or strategically repositioning for a more effective approach. I decided in that moment to receive it as the beginning, not with blind trust, not with the naive receptivity that had allowed the previous 3 years to build unremarked, but with the specific, open caution of someone who believes people are capable of change and is willing to find out. "I want that too," I said. "Let's take it slowly." She nodded. We drank our tea. It was the most honest conversation Patricia and I had ever had.
I want to tell you what I have learned. Not as rules, this story is specific enough that I cannot package it into prescriptions that will serve everyone, but as what I actually honestly learned from an October dinner, a suitcase on a bed, and 14 stairs. The first thing, the crisis you have been dreading is often also the clarity you have been needing. I spent 3 years dreading the moment when Patricia's behavior would become undeniable, when James would have to choose, when the situation would force a confrontation that the management and the patients and the absorbed comments had been postponing. I dreaded it because I did not know what James would do, and not knowing is its own specific terror. What I did not understand was that the dread was costing me more than the confrontation ever could. I was paying daily the price of a crisis that had not yet arrived. I was absorbing daily the weight of a situation I had not yet forced to its conclusion. And the avoidance was not protecting the marriage. It was slowly, incrementally eroding it. The October dinner forced the confrontation I had been avoiding, and the confrontation produced in one evening more genuine progress than 3 years of management had managed. Sometimes the thing you are dreading is the thing that tells you the truth you need. The second thing, the partner who chooses you when it costs them something is showing you who they are. It is easy to love someone who has never been tested. It is easy to believe in a partner when nothing has required them to demonstrate what they will do when belief requires a price. James choosing me that October evening, choosing to leave the table and come upstairs and then go back downstairs, cost him something real. It cost him the comfortable dynamic with his mother that he had maintained his entire life. It cost him the role of the son who never causes conflict. It cost him, at least temporarily, his mother's approval and comfort. He chose anyway. That choice told me more about who James was than 3 years of ordinary marriage had told me. Because ordinary marriage, for all its value and genuine intimacy, does not require the specific courage of publicly, clearly, without room for ambiguity, placing your loyalty where it belongs. I know now where I stand, not because James told me, because he showed me. The third thing, love that does not have boundaries is not love, it is management. I managed the Patricia situation for 3 years because I loved James, and because I had convinced myself that management was the form that love took in difficult circumstances. I was wrong. What I was doing was not love. It was accommodation, the specific, exhausting, ultimately self-defeating act of absorbing what should have been addressed. Real love would have insisted earlier on the conversation that was needed. Real love would have required James to see clearly and act on what he saw. Real love would have said 2 years ago, "This is not manageable, and I need you to do something about it." I waited too long, I know this. But the waiting ended on a Saturday in October, and what came after the ending was a marriage with more honest structural support than it had in the 3 years before it. That is a better foundation. It is the only one worth building on. My name is Leila. I am 30 years old and I live in Nashville, Tennessee. My mother-in-law told me to leave my home. I started packing, and my husband came upstairs and asked me to stop. What he did next told me everything I needed to know about the marriage I was in and the man I had married. Not every story like this one ends with James coming upstairs. I know that. Some partners do not come. Some partners stay at the table and wait for the storm to pass and ask you to be patient and call that love. If that is the story you are living, I want to say this clearly. Your home is not wherever someone tells you it is. Your home is wherever you are fully, genuinely, without condition, chosen. Find the place where you are chosen. Build your home there. And do not let anyone, not a mother-in-law, not a dining room full of family, not 3 years of absorbed comments and reorganized cabinets, tell you that you are less than completely at home in your own life. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe for new stories every week. And if you have ever been told, in whatever form, to make yourself smaller in your own home, leave a comment. You are not alone. Daily calls in the way they had been conducted, the comprehensive updates, the parental involvement in our decisions, the information pipeline that kept Patricia connected to the interior of our marriage in ways I had never consented to, those needed to become something less continuous. 2 or 3 times a week, with the specific discipline of not sharing information about our life, our decisions, our disagreements that Patricia then used as material for the management she conducted from Chattanooga. Second, when Patricia said or did something that crossed a line, James needed to address it in the moment. Not afterward, not in private with me where it was safe, not in the managed and muffled form that had characterized 3 years of "Mom doesn't mean it that way." In the moment, clearly. Third, the house. Patricia needed to understand, and James needed to reinforce this understanding consistently, that the house on Ellenwood Drive, I caught myself, that was the wrong story, the house in Germantown was our home, not James's home that Leila lived in, our home. The kitchen cabinets would remain where I put them. The decisions about the living room and the holiday schedule and the neighborhood association were ours to make. James listened to all 3 of these without defense. Then he said yes to all of it. I need more than yes, I said. I need you to understand that these aren't conditions for this week. They're the structure of how we function going forward. If this goes back to what it was in 6 months, I am not going to adjust again. I am going to leave. He met my gaze. I understand, he said. I'm not going back. Patricia called at 11 o'clock. James looked at the phone when it rang. At me, at the phone again. I said, answer it. He answered. I stayed at the table, which was itself a statement, not a declaration of eavesdropping, but of presence. I was in this house, in this kitchen, at this table, and that was the reality. I could hear Patricia's voice from across the table, not words, but the quality of it, softer than last night, the urgency replaced with something that might have been genuine humility or might have been the strategic softness of someone recalibrating. With Patricia, I had never been entirely able to tell the difference, and I was not going to try to tell it from across a kitchen table. What I could hear clearly was James's side of the conversation. He said, "I'm glad you called." He said, "What you said last night was wrong. I think you know that." He said, "Leila is my wife. This is our home. Those things are not going to change, and any relationship going forward needs to start from that understanding." He said, after a pause in which I could hear Patricia speaking, "I love you too, Mom. That's why this conversation matters." He said, "We'll talk more, but not today. Give us some time." He hung up. He set the phone on the table. He looked at me. "She cried," he said. "I know," I said. "Do you believe her?" he said. I thought about this honestly. I believe she is sorry for how it landed. Whether she understands why it was wrong, that's going to take longer, and I'm going to need to see the behavior change over time before I'm going to be able to receive the apology as complete. He nodded. "That's fair." "James," I said, "I'm not your mother's enemy. I have never been her enemy. I want a relationship with her that is honest and has appropriate boundaries, and can, over time, become something genuinely good. I think that's possible, but it requires her to see me as a person, not a variable in your life, and that change doesn't happen in one phone call." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." We finished our coffee. Outside the east window, the October backyard was doing what October backyards do, beautiful and brief, the colors at their most vivid precisely because they were about to change. We sat in it for a while.